I'm Erica McDonald. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of Baltimore County. I'll start by introducing you to the other League members who are facilitating the session, Sherilyn Luciani, who will be managing the Zoom for the session, and Nielsen Andrews, who will moderate the discussion. To ensure that our meeting runs smoothly, we ask that you keep yourselves muted during the meeting, unless you're speaking. And we will be taking questions via chat today because we have limited time. If you wish to ask a question, please put it in the chat with your name and, if you wish, your pronouns and organization. Also, this space is for meaningful discussion. Intelligent and thoughtful people often disagree, but we ask that you keep your questions and comments respectful. The agenda for this meeting will be, first, a brief overview of the League's legislative priorities, then presentations by our legislators, which will be about 3 minutes each, taking about an hour in total, followed by approximately 30 to 40 minutes of Q&A, where your questions will be posed to the legislators in the order of submission, starting with those submitted by participants when they registered. We ask that legislators raise their hands using the Zoom tool. If you have anybody has questions, feel free to unmute yourself and we can walk you through how to do that. If you want to respond to questions, depending on the number of questions, we may need to limit discussion time for each question, but we'll just roll with it and see how it goes. So to get started, I want to tell you a little bit about the League's mission. Our mission is empowering voters defending democracy. The League is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and all senators and delegates representing Baltimore County were invited to participate today. I think it's particularly important to say that it is not partisan to defend democracy. A year ago today, or not today, a few days ago, there was an insurrection to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, which is the foundation of democracy. The extremists behind this insurrection seek to undermine the democratic process because of their fear of where America is headed. These extremists are reacting to progress in racial justice and in the diversification of the American population. The League believes that systemic inequality undermines the security of our democracy. For example, the League has joined the ACLU's lawsuit against the racially gerrymandered districts in Baltimore County. It is our priority to advocate for legislation that strengthens our democracy and empowers all people to participate in their government. Next slide. Thanks. The League's priority for the 2022 legislative session include 3 broad areas: making democracy work, social and economic justice, and protecting the environment. Some of the issues we're concerned with are listed here, but they also include issues that address diversity, equity, and inclusion, such as giving students the right to vote on school boards, as well as issues of systemic inequality, such as the legalization of cannabis. The League works in coalition with other advocacy organizations to raise the voices of people of color and other underrepresented groups, such as the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability, which worked to pass police reform legislation last session. The League's advocates raise awareness of legislation, provide testimony, and mobilize voters. All right, next slide. So we encourage you to listen to your legislators' priorities and to reach out to them with your concerns throughout this legislative session. We are so excited to have our senators and, next slide, our delegates with us today before they head off to Annapolis next week. And with that, I will hand the presentation over to Nielsen Andrews to introduce our legislators.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here. We thought we would start with Senator Kelly, but she's not on the Zoom at this moment. So Senator Hettleman, if you would like to start, we ask you to keep it to 3 minutes each and give us your priorities of what you think this session will be like, or what you're interested in, or just in general, how you're getting ready for the session.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for having us here this morning or this afternoon. I forgot we're past noon here. This afternoon. I look forward to this day every year. It's definitely one of those markers. We know the Saturday before session, we will spend the afternoon with you. So I'm sorry that we're not able to break bread and enjoy the wonderful home-cooked, many of them home-cooked dishes that folks bring to the lunch that we usually have together. But it is good to see everyone nonetheless. I'm a member of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, and I'm just going to talk about a couple of bills that I'm working on that will, I think, align with the goals and the priorities that you've outlined this afternoon. One of which is reforming the way the Parole Commission considers geriatric and medical decisions. So right now we do have a statute that allows the Parole Commission to take into consideration someone's health in weighing whether to offer parole, but it's fairly vague and is very infrequently used. There's been quite a lot of research that has shown also that people who are incarcerated who are 60 and over have far less chance to recidivate than those who are younger. So I'm working with a coalition of advocates to review and reform how we consider those medical requests and compassionate release requests, especially in this time of COVID, when people who are behind the walls do have much more susceptibility to becoming ill. And there are so many who are dealing with chronic illnesses that both cost our state more and provide no assurance of, the people who are released are physically incapable of being a threat to public safety. So weighing those two things are something that we're looking at. On the environmental side, building on legislation I worked on last year to expand opportunities for organic waste recycling and getting them out, that kind of waste outside of landfills, which we know in Baltimore County are quickly filling up when there is an organic waste recycling center nearby, and one is being built over by the food center over on the west side of the county. We are going to be offering, I'm introducing a bill to create a grant program for encouraging schools, students in K through 12 institutions to look at what it is they are doing to reduce waste having to do with food, and then to encourage those kinds of programs so they can apply to an entity who will review grant applications and provide state money to encourage that reduction in food waste and to encourage organic recycling there. So those are just two things. I'm working on a lot of housing issues. We know that there are many people who are in vulnerable situations right now, especially with regard to rental housing, and reforming how we consider when to evict someone, especially in the context of having a lot of federal aid available. So we're looking to change that. And finally, one other highlight is to bring to life the legislation that we passed last year, which ensures a right to and access to counsel for people who are going through eviction proceedings. So we passed that last year, but we unfortunately did not fund it. So we're looking at and be working a lot on how we can bring some dollars to ensure that that new law goes into true effect. So those are just a few of the bills. I'm working on too many, but just a couple that align quite closely with your priorities. Thank you again for having us, and great to see everybody.
Let's, Senator Lamb.
Yeah.
I saw you. Great.
Great. Well, thank you, Nielsen. Great to be here. Good to see you again. And thank you to the League for hosting this afternoon. So Clarence Lamb, Senator in District 12, which represents Southwest Baltimore County. I serve on the Senate Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. Also serve as the Senate Chair of the Joint Audits Committee, as well as the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight. As a physician, my concerns still lie a lot with the current ongoing pandemic. There's obviously still a lot going on and a lot of concerns. Since the beginning of the pandemic, I've been fortunate to serve initially on the legislative COVID-19 work group, and then now for the past year on the Senate Vaccine Oversight Work Group, really looking at the state's efforts to roll out the vaccine, which initially was a little rocky, but since has gotten better, as well as testing, and now more recently as well as boosters. And so I am concerned that there's still a few things going on when it comes to the pandemic that we could still improve upon. One, we'd actually passed legislation during the 2021 legislative session to require the state health department to come up with better plans in place for pandemic response. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that, and we had to override that veto just in the last the special legislative session that took place in December. Had that not been vetoed, maybe our state would be in a better place right now to be prepared to help with the rollout of the boosters and also with improving testing availability, which I know has been a challenge in the struggle. It's an issue that we continue to meet with the secretary on a regular basis to try to address and improve upon. Obviously, open to your inputs and thought on that. I am concerned as well that during the past 22 months, we have lost many health officers here in the state. We've lost 7 out of 24 jurisdictions health officers, and that's a huge number. I don't think in the history of the state have we lost that many health officers in such a short period of time. Much of this is because they're exhausted, they're on the front lines as well, but they're also being attacked and accosted and under siege by many folks in their community or by other elected officials, which I think is wrong in many ways. And so we've seen health officers under attack just because they're following the science and following the evidence and actually following instructions that they're receiving from the health department itself. In fact, the secretary recently fired someone who was following instructions from the health department. And so one of the counties lost their health officers because of that reason. So I'm looking to put in place better protections for our health officers. There's also a bill I'm working on with Senator Young to ensure that these health officers will be protected from physical harm as well as looking at how we can improve whistleblower protections in the health department. There was a recent story in the Sun that's being pursued right now for a company that was contracted by the health department that couldn't properly handle vaccines. And so we have now hundreds, if not more than that, and the health department's not even sure how many people, I think, that have been vaccinated with vaccines that may not have been stored properly. And so these are folks that may be walking around thinking they're fully vaccinated, they're not. Unfortunately, the whistleblower was demoted, which seems to be a tendency by this health department to brush things under the carpet and also blame the messenger. So we're looking to put better protections in place for health officers. I'll wrap there in a second, but just wanted a round robin of other bills looking at helping improve telehealth access, including access to medications for those who have concerns for HIV. Also looking to improve Medicaid access for prenatal care. You know, that's incredibly important for many moms and parents, as well as caps on the price of insulin, which has really gotten out of hand for a drug that's very effective and common. So with that, I'll wrap and hand it back to Nielsen.
And let's call on Senator Sidnor. Senator?
Good afternoon. Senator Charles Sidnor for District 44. First of all, before I speak about my legislation, I wanted to thank you all for being partners in this fight over redistricting lines here in Baltimore County at the local level since the very beginning of us making sure that the public knew what was going on in Baltimore County. You have been at the forefront with a variety of other organizations as well as citizens, and for that I thank you. And I certainly look forward being a co-plaintiff with you to some victory in the courts and that relief that we could not get from our county council. With that said, there was one thing that I wanted to raise up, which is a constitutional amendment that this legislature actually passed last year. And it's a bill that's going to be on the ballot this year, and that's to ensure that legislators actually live in the districts that they represent. This has been a problem, and I put in a bill beginning 2 years ago, and it actually passed last year, where legislators actually have to have a place of abode in order to represent your district. So that's going to be on the ballot. Hopefully we can work together and make sure that the public is aware that this is a good thing, that there have been some legislators that have had apartments and things in districts and use those apartments where they really didn't live in those communities to represent a district. So additionally, out of this situation that transpired here in Baltimore County, when the county council initially, when their commission put forth those maps, I'd reached out to our state attorney general and realized that the state attorney general was really powerless to do anything about what a local branch or local government was doing in terms of redistricting. So research showed me that there are places like California who actually have a state voting rights act. So I will be introducing the Maryland Voting Rights Act of 2022, which is going to be based on the Federal Voting Rights Act, which will give our Attorney General the ability to step in when our local governments aren't doing what they should be doing, or our municipal governments are acting in ways that our Baltimore County Council has acted. So that bill is still in drafting. Otherwise, I would have shared it with you all by now. But I'm going to be looking forward to presenting that to the body this year. In addition, when I think about the types of legislation that kind of falls within the framework that you all talked about, I'll be introducing a few bills dealing with the usage of body cameras. One is a cleanup to last year's Senate Bill 71, where we had put the word county before law enforcement agency, which has caused some confusion to municipal police departments about whether or not they were going to be required to have body cameras by 2025. So the intent is to strike the word county, so that everyone understands that when we said we intended everyone to have body cameras by 2025, we really meant everyone. In addition to that, there'll be legislation that I have that will deal with the body camera footage. I've introduced this legislation in the past, but it's always only gotten passed in one house and never the other. But it's called the Public Information Act, inspection records from body-worn digital recording devices. And what the bill is intended to do is to empower people who've been caught, or a class of people who've been caught on a video camera, to ensure that they actually have some power over the release of these body camera footage. So for example, if you've been a victim of domestic violence or something, the way the current law is, it's possible that someone could come in and get that footage and put it out there. So we want to kind of empower certain classes of people who've been caught on that footage, or that body camera footage, to ensure that they can control that image rather than it just kind of being put out to the public. Outside of that, I'm working on some legislation dealing with our Baltimore County Western Redevelopment Authority, some legislation dealing with things that go on in our circuit courts. Similar to Senator Lamb, I also will have a bill dealing with the medical assistance program, but in my respect will be for dealing with community violence prevention services and ensuring that those who provide those kinds of services can use the funding that's there to help benefit people who are in need of those services. So with that said, I do thank you for the time and the opportunity to speak to everyone.
Thank you. Lisa Belcastro. Okay, Belcastro?
Yep, I'm here. Thank you so much. And thank you to the league for having us today. Thank you so much for your advocacy. My name is Lisa Belcastro, and I'm one of the delegates from District 11. In addition to serving in the legislature, I'm also a special education teacher, and I have a number of bills this year to really highlight education and what some of the issues that we've been dealing with this year. Our students spend a lot of time virtual or in a hybrid model. And as they've come back, we really should be focusing on that social emotional learning. And a piece of that, I think about my school specifically when I talk about this, students need to be engaging with one another, playing with one another. And I think about the playgrounds at my school when I think about that, the need to update them, the need to ensure that kids with disabilities have access to playground equipment that fits their needs. So we're going to have a bill to create a grant program. It's going to be called the School Wellness and Recess Grant Program, to allow public schools to apply to the grant program to update their playgrounds, make sure again that they are conducive and accessible to kids with disabilities. We're really excited about that. Another issue that I want to talk about is school testing. One of the first things that we did after our kids came back from this virtual hybrid model is we tested our kids. And in my school, that meant 2 weeks of disrupted learning. 2 weeks of not being able to be in my classroom, being shifted to other rooms to cover testing. And that's a huge issue. So a few years ago, we passed a bill where we were supposed to reduce the amount of testing that we were doing in Maryland. We're going to be putting in a bill to really study and look closely to see that schools are meeting that mark and making sure that school systems are working to reduce the amount of testing that they are doing. Another bill, this is a carry on from last year. We feel hopeful that it will pass this year, is the Suicide Fatality Review Board. And we know across the country and across the state and across the country that suicides are on the rise, but we don't necessarily have the answer of how we start to bring that back down. And what the Suicide Fatality Review Board would do is it would study specific suicides that happen in the state. And when you start to study specific suicides that happen across the state, you can start to identify trends. And when you can identify trends, you can identify policy fixes or fixes within governmental agencies to start to drive that number down. The best example that I can give is they tried something like this in Washington County, Oregon, and they were able to identify that a large number of people, it's extremely sad to say, prior to committing suicide would drop a pet off at a shelter. And what they decided to do is they trained the individuals at that intake to identify signs of distress. And they, because of this suicide review board, they were actually able to, they saw a drop in the amount of suicides in Washington County, Oregon. So we're looking to do something across the state. We've been working with Johns Hopkins on this and a number of other stakeholders to hopefully get this across the finish line this year. The last bill that I want to highlight, I want to try and stick to my 3 minutes, is a number. We're going to have 2 bills involving name changes for the trans community. It is extremely difficult, and also it can be rather expensive for the trans community and burdensome for them to change their names. And it becomes more than just an equity issue. It becomes a healthcare issue, because those forms that you need are what you need to get the healthcare that you need, to get your children signed up at school, to get to be able to travel, to get your passport. And so what we want to do is we want to make it easier for individuals to change their names on their marriage certificate and also on their birth certificates through something called self-attestation. So we're going to be working on that this year. I have a number of other bills, but I think I'm right at the 3-minute mark, and I actually might be the most expedient legislator so far. So I'm going to stop right there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Nielsen, this is Erica. Before we go on to our next speaker, I've heard that people are having trouble with the chat. They're unable to send messages to everybody about their questions. So I don't know if we can address that, but in the meantime, if you would want to send them to me, I've gotten a couple of them. I will make a list and I can share them with Nielsen.
Erica, why don't you just hold on to them and we'll go back and forth?
Okay, that sounds great. So please feel free to send the questions directly to me, and I apologize for that.
Okay.
Thanks.
And Senator Kelly has joined us now, I believe. So Dolores, I'll call on you. Is Senator Kelly,
I think she's muted.
she's not on my screen.
I see.
Responding, so I think she may be on another call. There was a little glitch earlier that I think she's probably doing 2 Zooms at once.
Okay, let's call on on Delegate Bendary.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. This is Delegate Harry Bhandari. I represent District 8. Looking ahead to 2022, I've already filed or prepared to file a number of bills. More will come as we head into the legislative session. And I'm always open to hearing from our constituents and from you guys about our priorities. And one bill I'm sponsoring with District 15, Senator Brian Philman, in the upcoming session would make monitoring our blood pressure, monitoring from home easier, helping folks stay more informed about their health and potentially saving trips to the doctor. And another bill I'm sponsoring with District 43, Senator Mary Washington, would allow pharmacists to prescribe medication to ease reliance on tobacco among smokers, increasing support for tobacco users to improve their own health. And I will be introducing other couple of bills that I could have passed last session. And I'm very much looking forward to my 4th regular legislative session. And as I said before, your priorities are my priority. And I'm on the Health and Government Operations Committee. So I'm really committed to make sure that the prescription drug, the cost goes down. So I'll be fighting a lot of bills that would help vulnerable. And thank you for hosting this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim, Shiloh, would you like to speak for Delegate Brooks?
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. Kim Shiloh on behalf of Delegate Ben Brooks. Delegate Brooks is actually in transition, so I was hoping to be able to be on the call, but I think he's still on the road. Delegate Brooks represents the 10th Legislative District, and he sits on Economic Matters and is the chair of the Public Utilities Subcommittee. Delegate Brooks is introducing several pieces of legislation, a couple in which that he's reintroducing from last session to offer tax credits for veterans and for our seniors. He's also reintroducing initiatives to incentivize increasing or improving the ventilation and insulation in residential and businesses through his Passive Homes and Healthy Homes initiative. And then this year, he's also introducing a bill to offer tax credits for supermarkets to incentivize them opening in food deserts in Baltimore County. So thank you again for allowing me to be here on his behalf. Hopefully he'll be able to join at some point before we conclude, but I know he looks forward to this every year.
Thank you, Kim. Delegate Eric Ebersol.
Oh, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you all. It's interesting because I noticed that your original presentation talked about January 6th, and first of all, I'm very saddened to think of people who lost their lives January 6th in our Capitol. And that was a very overt attempt to subvert the democratic process. But even though we'd like to see that never happen again, we all know that it is being done in a much more under the table way now. Many states are passing laws to reduce access to voting, and I think that impacts certain populations. And also, this is the worst, people are being appointed to offices that might not be faithful to the electoral process in their states. Fortunately, at least as far as we go, Maryland is not doing that. We, in the last session, expanded access to voting in the state of Maryland because we believe the more people that vote, the more accurate and valuable our democratic process is. I also know, and I'll let Delegate Stein talk about this when his turn comes up. He has a bill I know that we didn't quite get through last year, but it's to eliminate the possibility of faithless electors in the Electoral College for the state of Maryland. I hope we serve as an example to some other states. That our democracy is certainly in some danger right now. And we deal with election law in Ways and Means where I serve. I also serve on as the chair of the Early Childhood Subcommittee. And to that, the issues that are right in front of me all the time are those of childcare and pre-K. Childcare across the state is in danger. We have to remember that childcare is not a public service. It's often run by nonprofits or by LLCs and doesn't have to stay around. And many child cares went under during COVID. And we've developed several bills that will incentivize new child cares to come online. And also we're working on pre-K capacity across the state. Child care is the workforce that supports the workforce. Some people have the luxury of being able to work online in a COVID type situation. But other people have to be at work and they have to have their children cared for. I even saw a terrible story the other day about a woman wanted to go get care at a doctor's office. She wasn't allowed to bring her children in because of COVID. I understand that. She had no way to do that. She didn't have any child care, so she couldn't get the medical help she herself needed. This is a critical issue, and we need to make sure that people have ways to get children taken care of, especially people who are in impacted communities. Looking forward, I think one of the major issues in schools is going to be children's mental health in schools. And we talk about school resource officers and some of the dangers they prevent and also the dangers they ameliorate. But on the front end, we need to recognize problems that students have. And there are school psychologists and lots of mental health professionals in buildings. The blueprint was largely silent on them, and I'll be introducing a bill to include them in the sort of run-up of better salaries, better work conditions, and better vetting to make sure that we get the very best people into those positions in schools. And also people stay around so they become good at their jobs and can continue. By the way, Delegate Belcastro, I applaud your efforts on testing because my goodness, we spend far too much time testing the knowledge that we haven't had a chance to teach. The final thing I will tell you is that I am working on a bill in Baltimore County to expand the student member of the board's voting rights. Right now, students can vote on policy, but they can't vote on the school budget. And very often, policy that is not supported by a budget is not policy at all. And so if a student is going to be allowed to participate and be part of creating and voting on policy, they need to be able to vote positively or negatively on the budget that will support it or won't in that particular case. And I think my experience with student members of the board is they're some of the hardest working people that are on the board. And here's why. It's not because they're necessarily more dedicated. Students come in with a natural bias against them because they're young. Many people dismiss them. And so I've watched student members of the board who work extra hard to establish their credibility and extra hard to be well informed on issues. I find them to be some of the very best voters, some of the very wisest voters on boards of ed. And so I'll be I've introduced a bill there. I've also introduced it in Howard County, which, because I'm in District 12, I also represent to also expand that at the same time. I got lots of other stuff, but we'll leave it at that for 3 minutes. I hope I made it. I didn't time myself.
I think you did. Thank you.
Great. Excellent.
Delegate Feldmark.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having us. I'm Delegate Jessica Feldmark. I represent District 12. I too serve on the Ways and Means Committee, and I am a member of the Election Law Subcommittee as well as the Revenues Subcommittee. I also serve on the Joint Committee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Biotechnology. There's a lot going on coming up in this session, and you've heard already some of the wide variety. What I thought I would do is just quickly touch on a few of the bills that I'm working on that, as you went over your priority areas, the ones that I saw sort of some clear connections under making democracy work, which is really fundamental to everything else we do as a legislature. I do serve on the election law subcommittee, and I am very proud of the work Maryland has done to expand ease of voting and access to the ballot so that every eligible voter has a chance to make their voice heard. And I want to thank the League because you have been an active partner in that process and a regular participant in our hearings. One bill I'm introduced last year and I'm bringing back this year is to expand local public campaign financing to state offices that are elected at the county level. So to allow counties that already have a public financing program to add additional offices to that. One bill that I have had the last couple of years, and I know we've spoken about at this event previously, is increasing access to the ballot for voters with disabilities. I actually will not be reintroducing that bill this year. As well as our legislative efforts, there was also a court case, a legal challenge that the National Federation of the Blind had brought. And they did reach a settlement agreement with some specific actions that the Board of Elections will be taking to try to improve the situation. So we're taking this year to see how that goes. And so I really want to ask for the League's help in your involvement in poll watching and things like that. We really need to work together to see how that settlement agreement is implemented, and then sort of regroup on what, if any, legislative strategy we want to take up in the future. Then moving on to social and economic justice, as I have just a few seconds left. I will be working on the homeowners property tax credit again. This is a really critical piece for homeowners with low income, where their property tax becomes an unbearable burden and folks risk losing their home at tax sale. What we want to do is streamline and ease the application process so that folks who are eligible get that credit without a huge administrative burden, and most importantly, that they get it, because so often we find folks facing tax sale only to see they would have been eligible for the tax credit, but didn't have it. I am out of time, but look forward to discussing other issues as we get to questions and answers. Thank you.
Delegate Forbes? Oh, Delegate Forbes, do you mind waiting a minute? Well, I see that Dolores Kelly is back on, and we'd love to hear from her.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've been on for a while, but for some reason I couldn't get unmuted. One of the things that I'm working on is a bill to stop double taxation of people in homeowner associations. Right now, many of our homeowner associations and most of the new housing being built in Baltimore County and in many other areas of the state are built as homeowner associations, so that the people who are the residents pay separately for things such as stormwater management, the identification and tagging and removal of abandoned cars. They're paying for the construction of roads and for snow removal from their roads and so on. And yet the counties do this for all of their other residents. And there's no accommodation right now for those people in the homeowner associations who are doing a lot of these services for themselves and who are still paying the very same tax rates as others. So that's one of the things that we will be working on. Right now, we've got 7 or 8 of these circumstances where there is a lot of the double taxation. Right now, there are 8 counties that have municipal corporations within the counties, Baltimore County being one of them, and they get certain accommodations back on the taxes that are that they are responsible for. And we want to do the same thing for individual homeowners who are in homeowner associations. Another thing that we want to do is to crack down on members of the General Assembly who are not residing in their districts, the districts that they are representing. And so I have studied a lot of other states that have been working on this issue, and I found a pretty good example in Florida that I'm sort of using as a template. If you, when you consider that every year we all get an annual individual conference with the council to the General Assembly. And when that person meets with the members individually, they will have to go over 16 different variables, any of which would probably indicate there's something wrong in terms of whether or not the person is residing in the district that that individual is representing. And they can be referred for further study. They can be referred to the Attorney General, for an example, in order to have some follow-up on it. We have had a case that many people have been concerned about right in District 10, where it appears that maybe not everybody serving is living in the district that they are representing. So that's what that one's about. I'm also working on a bill to bring people in assisted living, and there are 16,000 assisted living homes that we know about in the state of Maryland. There is no oversight board for those people as there is for those in nursing homes. So we're going to rename the board, give it a broader area of responsibility, and make sure that those in assisted living, many of whom have no close relatives, and very often the assisted living managers are the representative payees for the Social Security checks of the people who are living there. We want to make sure, I know in some parts of my district, the police have been frequently called by neighbors who believe that some assisted living residents are not getting the best treatment. We want to crack down on that. I've got a lot of bills, but I'll mention those three, and I hope that you guys will find them of interest. I'm working also with some people who are trying to make sure that we don't lose abortion rights in Maryland because of the loss of the economic access that is going to be needed in order to be sure that it is present. We think about, just as an example, a 10-year-old child who's a rape or incest victim, and to see the direction the country is going in right now is frightening. We want to make sure we are going in the right direction in Maryland. And thanks so much.
Thank you. I believe that Sheila Ruth may need to leave. Is that true, Delegate Ruth?
I can stay a little bit longer. Thank you. If you want to go.
Do you want to go? You're on now. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Sure.
I'll
That
come
would.
back and do it in alphabetical order after you.
Sure. That would be great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to present here. And so equity and racial justice is really an important priority. I try to make sure I consider it in everything that I do, but I also have some bills that specifically focus on that. One bill that that passed the House last session, but it didn't get a vote in the Senate. I'll be reintroducing again, and this bill protects students from a law which is on the books that makes it a crime to disrupt school activities. What that does is it criminalizes typical adolescent behavior like storming out of the classroom. Students need to learn that that's not appropriate behavior, but referral to the criminal justice system is not the way to approach that. And 82% of the students who are charged under this law are Black and Brown students. And so this law would protect students from being charged under that law. And this session, it's being sponsored in the Senate by Senator Washington. So I'm hopeful that we can get it through both chambers this time. I'm also reintroducing my transportation equity bill, which is both of these bills are pre-filed. The school disruption bill is HB 84, and my transportation equity bill is HB 141. And so the transportation equity bill really looks at transportation, not just transit, but all transportation statewide, and really tries to focus on making sure that in transportation planning, MDOT is considering equity throughout the process. It requires equity as a goal in the Maryland Transportation Plan. It requires some data being published in their annual report about racial results and also people with disabilities. It creates a commission on transportation equity that would be an independent entity that works with MDOT on really ensuring that equity is taken into account and looks at a lot of different factors. And it also creates some requirements when there are major service changes to ensure that there's no disparate impact for those major service changes. There is a federal requirement under Title VI to avoid disparate impact, but this goes a little bit further than that and codifies it in state law. I'm almost out of time, but I'll mention a few environmental bills that I have. One would transfer the regulation of pesticides, which is currently under Maryland Department of the Agriculture. It transfers that authority to Maryland Department of the Environment, where they really have the expertise to regulate pesticides. Also, but in consultation with Agriculture and also Department of the Health. And I also have a bill that will add some requirements for new gas stations that they have to be at least 1,000 feet from setback from schools, daycare centers, hospitals, residential land, and other gas stations to avoid the cumulative impact of multiple gas stations in the same location, cumulative environmental impact, and would also require new gas stations to install electric vehicle chargers as well to help ease that transition to the zero emission economy. I have a lot more, but I don't want to go over, and I really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Forbes.
Actually, Nielsen, I believe that we missed Delegate Cardin.
Yes, I was going to come back to him in just a second. John, are you on? We can go there.
That's fine. I'll wait. I'm good.
You want to go ahead? You're on now.
Okay, you've called for Delegate Forbes twice already, so I figured I'd let her go. Okay. Thank you very much, and it's always a pleasure to work with the League of Women Voters. For 20 years, I have been looking at your agenda and saying these are the kinds of things that I want to focus on, and it's been a great partnership, and thank you. I look at democracy, social and economic justice, and protecting the environment as your three major issues. And I think that, number one, I got involved. I ran for office first in 2002 because of environmental issues after writing my master's thesis on some environmental preservation, and continue to, while my rating with the League of Conservation Voters went down, it went down from 99.4 to 98.8 because there was a bill that I couldn't vote for because it never got out of committee. So Dana, try and get those bills out of committee, will you? And in terms of democracy, obviously, you know that we're all on the same page. I served for many years, for 8 years, as the chair of the Election Law Subcommittee in the Ways and Means Committee. And that committee does great work and will continue to do great work. And I will continue to support the good legislation that comes out of there to make sure that Maryland stays the free state that it is. And then finally, in terms of social and economic justice, let me highlight just a couple things and say that if there's anything you want to talk about, please come and talk to me, because nothing gets done in Annapolis without making sure that we hear from our constituency. And I want to make sure that that is the League of Women Voters, because I really do respect it. First is, while we passed, and I was very involved in the no-knock warrant legislation from last year in the police reform work that we did, and it was great work. We left out a loophole for bounty hunters and bail bondsmen that can still execute no-knock warrants with guns blazing. And I have a bill in to work on that. Believe it or not, it still happens, and we want to make sure that that is that they are held to at least the same requirements as police are. There have been an unprecedented number of deaths due to drug overdoses in Maryland and across the country, exponentially more because of COVID. I will be working on my Good Samaritan legislation again, which we passed in 2013, to improve it, to make sure that when people call 911 because somebody's overdosing, whether it be on alcohol or drugs or other things, that they are not in fear of being arrested for minor misdemeanors such as trespass or drug use. We want to save lives. Panic defense, which we passed a prohibition on the panic defense for sexual orientation, sexual identity last year. I believe that it should be expanded to protect all protected classes, including religion, and we should ban the panic defense for that. I can talk about that a little bit more another time if anybody is interested in that very interesting but complex area of law. The last thing I'll mention is Grace's Law. Those of you who know my history know that cyberbullying and bullying of children has been an important issue that I've dealt with for almost 2 decades. And we, with the help of Grace McComas's mom, Christine, we're going to work on a piece of legislation to improve Grace's Law. And I can go into details on that as well, maybe during the questions and answers. Thank you all very much, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Delegate Forbes.
I thank you all for having us this afternoon.
Thank you for your patience.
Oh, thank you for being here and caring and taking the time to learn about the work we were hoping to do in Annapolis. I was a member of the League of Women Voters before I could vote, which is kind of crazy now thinking about it. But it was on issues of a woman's right to choose, and it was on issues that took me there on divesting in South Africa. I am Kathy Forbes. I represent District 42A, which is the Towson area in Baltimore County. I sit on the Appropriations Committee, and on Appropriations, my subcommittee is Education and Economic Development. I am here to report that the state is in a historically strong financial position with budget surpluses, not just in this year, but in years out. And so it is really imperative that we be thoughtful about what we do with those surpluses. And our first priority has to be the fallout of the pandemic. Like keeping people in their homes, keeping people fed, supporting our teachers, supporting our frontline healthcare workers. What could we do to make the pandemic better for the people that it's still affecting so dramatically? Because it is, as we found in the last couple of weeks, still here with us and still so serious. Overall, long-term, I consider myself an environmentalist, and I think that we really need to address climate change in Annapolis. Last year, we had a large bill that was the Climate Solutions Now Act that passed both the House and the Senate, but failed to come to compromise in conference committee. Parts of it were stripped off and passed, but we really do need to look at that. Senator Hettleman and I are reintroducing a bill called the Green Buildings Restoration Act. Maryland was a leader in green building in 2010, saying that 2008 actually, saying that all buildings built with state funding, schools had to be LEED certified, high performance green buildings. In 2016, we rolled back that requirement, and now we just encourage buildings. And what Senator Hettleman and I have heard from architects and engineers encouraging isn't working. There are buildings being built with state funds that aren't anywhere close to net zero or even LEED certified. So I will be reintroducing that. Education is always a huge issue in Annapolis. I appreciate the league's support of the blueprint for education. And there was a lot of discussion about how education, how the blueprint, we couldn't afford it. But I'm happy to report that it is fully funded through FY 2027 with existing sources. And so we can afford it and we can do these things. The blueprint legislation came out of the Kirwan Commission, and all of that happened pre-pandemic. So the blueprint addresses the needs we knew were there in our system before the pandemic, and staffing and teachers was a big part of the blueprint, and making sure we're retaining good teachers and attracting the most qualified teachers. And so we revisited the blueprint last session and amended it to address some of the pandemic needs, but I hope that we will go back again and meet the needs going forward. One last thing is school construction. Built to Learn was 3 years in the making before, and money is about to start flowing in Built to Learn, but that money isn't probably enough. And so I would ask, and I know the county executive is asking for additional capital funding for school construction across the state to meet the needs. It's flowing now at a time when school construction is the most expensive it's ever been. And so to meet the needs that we have in Baltimore County and across the state, I'm hoping that some of this budget surplus will be spent on school construction. And we know whatever we do with the budget surplus in capital costs triggers a whole lot of other industries, everything from architects and engineers to the building supply people, to the people that serve food on job sites and the workers on the job sites. So it is a good economic stimulus. And I am way over my time, but thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you. Delegate Hill? Jerry?
Yes, so thank you, Nelson. Thank you all for having us, for doing this. And I have to say that your coordinating with Howard County has made it much easier for those of us in District 12 to participate. But it is nice, as much as I hate being in a pandemic, I do like the fact that I didn't have to be on the road this afternoon running from one to the other. So especially on these icy roads. So a couple of things. One of the bills I'm introducing this coming session is to make corrections in our Constitution. Erica spoke about, what we're learning about the fragility of our Constitution and how things that we assume or that we all agree on, we don't necessarily all agree on, and can be used against us. So our state Constitution talks about religious freedom, and it talks about all persons equally entitled to protection in their religious liberty. But it also goes on to say, I'm going to quote here, provided he believes in the existence of God, and that under his dispensation, such persons will be held morally accountable for his acts and be rewarded or punished, therefore, either in this world or in the world to come. So this bill would strip out the language that essentially requires a belief in God in order to be protected under our state Constitution, and would also change the masculine language to gender neutral language. And it looks like, people might think this is not a big deal, but again, I'm trying to prevent some dangerous things from coming down the pike. Another bill that I think would be of interest to this group is reintroduction of legislation for mattress stewardship programs statewide, energy efficient buildings or green buildings, requiring that the state establish standards similar, I guess, to what Delegate Forbes and Senator Hedelman are doing, but the bill that was laughingly called the Bird Bill the last 3 times that I introduced it. And it's passed both chambers at different times, but hopefully this year it will get through. And it again requires that state buildings and buildings built with state funds meet LEED 55 standards, including external modifications and tintings that mitigate against or mitigate bird strikes that are killing more than 1 million birds each year. I'm working on a number of equity bills, including shielding of eviction filings that did not actually result in evictions, to try and address problems that people have in housing, holding on to generational wealth, introducing a real property transfer on death deed for the state, similar to what we have in 27 other states, trying to allow for people in certain cases who inherit property. Again, primary wealth for most families is that family home, to pay the taxes after the inheritance instead of having to pay the taxes in order to inherit. And then going forward with corrections legislation to deal with pay to folks in corrections, support to help them on reentry so that the recidivism rate goes down, and also to make sure that they have access to plant-based food to hopefully improve their health status and secondarily decrease our cost. And then legislation around vision and hearing supports for kids so that our kids are prepared to learn in the school environment, and a number of other bills. And one final thing, I introduced last year legislation around election judges training and accommodations for people in need of assistance, so that election sites would actually post what accommodations were available, so that people would know as they came what they could ask for, and that the judges knew what kind of accommodations that they could offer. This was combined with a bill that Delegate Guyton introduced, and that bill, the combination bill, was passed out of the House. It did not pass the Senate, and it's being reintroduced by Delegates Guyton and me this year. So that's another bill that I think would be of particular interest to this organization and its members. Only would hope to have your support. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Delegate Stein?
Thank you. Thank you to the League for this opportunity to hear from you about your priorities, and for us to talk about some of the legislation that we'll be introducing. I am Vice Chair of the House Environment and Transportation Committee, and for a number of years, one of my top issues has been climate change. It really is one of the most critical issues of our time. Maryland is already feeling the impacts of rising temperatures and sea level rise, which will only accelerate unless we take major action. So I'm working on the House package of legislation that will be climate change related. And my particular focus is on buildings, decarbonizing, reducing the carbon footprint of new and existing buildings so that they can play their part in getting the state to net zero emissions by 2045. So in particular, my legislation will say that new buildings that are built beginning in a few years will have to be all electric when it comes to heating and hot water purposes. So no more use of fossil fuels for those purposes. With respect to existing buildings, the larger ones, we'll be establishing what's called a building emissions standard, so that their direct building emissions have to get to zero by 2040. So that will be significant legislation that I'll be putting forward. On a completely different topic, gun safety, I'll be bringing back a bill that would strengthen the standard under which a gun owner has to store a gun at their home so that a child won't get access to it. And tragically, the recent shooting at a school in Michigan shows what can happen when a gun owner does not keep their gun away from their child. In the area of financial education, something that I've been working on for a number of years, I've come to the conclusion that really the best way, the only effective way to teach financial education to our children is by having a standalone graduation requirement. So some school districts already have that. I'll be putting in legislation that would require that for all school districts. And lastly, Delegate Eversole brought up my bill from last session dealing with faithless electors, which would have said that, which would have established penalties if someone who signed up to be an elector changes their mind and decides to vote for another presidential candidate. I won't be bringing it back this coming session, but hopefully if I make it back for another term, I'll be bringing it back then. So thank you, and I think I'm right at my 3-minute mark.
Thank you, Dana. Delegate Pat Young, and thank you for being patient.
No, thank you all, and no worries. I'm used to going last with the last name.
Yeah.
It was no good. Forgive me, I'm on daddy duty today, and my kids know that they're allowed to come into the office regardless of what I'm doing, because I don't want them to feel that they don't have access to me. One, thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I think my colleagues have said the same thing. We look forward to this every year. One, it's a good opportunity for us to kind of go through what we're planning in our heads, and also to talk to your members and let you know from a district perspective and our respective committees what our focus is going to be. So I'll mention three things that I think are pertinent to you all and what I'll be working on last year. And this is a reintroduction of a establishment of a climate change office in the office of the governor. This came from the county executive's discussions that we had that we introduced for him that didn't go anywhere last year, but we're going to put it in again. One, I think we're in lockstep in terms of other members related to the importance of climate change. I also had the privilege and opportunity to be invited to the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow this past November, and got a international perspective on what other nations are doing, what we're not doing, and then just the sense of urgency that seems to exist in other nations compared to ours, and the different levels associated with climate change. Of course, we're talking about coordinating our efforts to try and come down to net zero and meet our goals related to emission standards. But there are these other layers also. There's a multi-trillion-dollar economy that's already active and already moving in other nations that we can capitalize on as a state that we're not doing. This office, in my vision, can provide for a window and a doorway to try and organize our efforts towards what can we do for a state, what's already being done in other nations, and how we can invite some of those opportunities to our citizens and to our state as well. I am the chair of the Joint Committee on IT, Cybersecurity, and Biotech. Last year, there were a number of bills related to cybersecurity that didn't go anywhere, and partly for strategic purposes related to what leadership wanted to put into a package. Now we have guidelines. There's going to be 3 specific bills that are in a package, and possibly more, that deal with, one, addressing the fact that we have been the victim of the state and individual jurisdictions of cyber attacks, not just in this past year, but for years. Our data is insecure. The fact that our citizens rely on and believe, and I also believe, that the state has a responsibility to have a certain level of security related to the data that we're protective of. We need to address that. We don't have a centralized office that has authority over the other departments. We have an office, but they can't dictate or even know what other agencies are doing related to their legacy systems. So we're going to modernize our policy, help other agencies with their, that was my own timer, help other agencies with modernizing their own systems and opting out of legacy systems, and just making sure that we're prepared for the next attack, not reacting to the next one that happens, because it's going to happen. And the last thing quickly, working on legislation that has been done in other states related to the LGBT community that may have been discharged from the National Guard due to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We'd approached this in a different way in my last term, where we went to the Maryland Military Department to talk about how many folks have been discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Unfortunately, there wasn't a code that said that this person was discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So the response was, we don't think we discharged anybody. Well, we know that wasn't the case. So we're taking a different approach that other states have, where creating a clear, defined, as well as a accountable process, so that if we have citizens or even folks that used to be members of the National Guard that have moved somewhere else that got an other than honorable discharge, or just a general under honorable, they can change their status to honorable through a process that's established in the state. With that, went over my time a bit, but I'm happy to take questions and stick around. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Right now, we're going to go to some of the questions that were asked by people when they signed up. And it might help if the legislators could, if you know somebody has a particular interest in a question like that I'm going to ask, maybe they could answer it instead of each one of you answering it. We have 3. The first thing is Leslie Grant, who's on here, who happens to be a dentist also, wanted to thank you all for expanding postpartum Medicare dental benefits last year. So that's an important benefit for Medicaid patients, and she wanted to say thank you. And we have 3 questions on redistricting. And I'm going to read all three of them, and then maybe, we can get some answers from them. One question is, the nation is truly on the verge of losing its democracy, and 2022 may be the last democratic way of voting. What protections is the legislature likely to make in this session to protect the right to vote? Senator Sidnor addressed that in his voting rights bill that he is up. So we know there's one bill that's going to address that. Another question was, do you expect the legislative redistricting maps to be approved as currently drafted, or can we expect significant changes? And another question is, Tracy Miller asked if she has questions about the new District 11 ramifications.
And Nielsen, maybe I'll jump in since we're talking about redistricting. Tracy further elaborated on her question in the chat, and if I could just read that before.
Oh, yes, you can, please.
Okay, so what are the upshots of this redistricting? As I understand, there will be a new single member district in the western part of the district and 2-person district in the east. I tried to find the boundaries, but could not. I live in the eastern part, so I assume I will be in 11B, but where is the border? If anybody can speak to that. And if not, we can follow up afterwards on that.
So this is Shelley Heddleman, I'm the senator from District 11, and I'm happy to put in the chat, or you can share it, the link to the new map. So that way you can actually put in your address. Maybe Erica, I can just share it with you. And you can see, but Tracy, you would still be in 11, you would be in 11B. Just FYI.
Thank you, and I will share that with everybody.
Okay, I just copied that and I will put that in here. So there, when the Attorney General reviewed the proposed map that had been offered by the Legislative Redistricting Advisory Commission, they took, they review all of the districts to ensure that they comply with the Voting Rights Act. And they took a look at District 11 and they decided that there were potentially some legal issues with regard to creating a single member district, and they opted to create a single member district. It goes along sort of the northwest spine of the district. It takes in large parts of Owings Mills, not all of Owings Mills, but parts of Owings Mills and other areas into the valley. And it is borders the 10th district on the west, and then obviously 11B on the eastern side. Tracy, you're saying, I can't hear you, but I see you motioning. But you can go to the Maryland General Assembly website and you can find that map there.
Okay, I unmuted myself, so I hope that's all right. So the thing is, this is Tracy, the thing is, often I do sign waving and things in Pikesville, Reisterstown Road, which I still could do, but is Reisterstown Road A, B, the dividing line? What's the deal?
Well, it's not quite as neat as that, to be honest. There are parts of Reisterstown Road that are in A and parts that are in B. So you'll have to take a closer look at that. And we're honestly, that was just posted last night. So we're all kind of digging in and looking at it and seeing exactly where those lines are. I'm just going to respond to a question that somebody asked about. This is my personal opinion, but it is what happened with regard to the congressional map. Is I would not anticipate any other changes to it. I believe that this is the map that we will consider in the legislature. If my colleagues differ, then they should speak up, but that's my personal opinion.
Nielsen, if I may, you're allowed to put up signs for other candidates if you live in a house that's close to that district. People don't stop driving at the edge of their legislative districts. And so if you're someone who wants to support someone by waving or putting up a sign, and you're a couple of neighborhoods over or even a mile over, feel free to support them, okay?
Signs too, absolutely.
Yeah, all that, please. Don't limit yourself by that geographic map.
Yeah, everybody put up a sign for Eric Ebersol.
Yeah.
Up in District 11, please. That's where I want it.
All right, then we have a question on the blueprint for education. And the person wanted to know, what is the primary area of focus with regard to the blueprint for education implementation and monitoring?
I can take that if everybody doesn't mind. The blueprint has a lot of focus. It's a 200-page bill, so it takes up a fair amount of space in the Code of Maryland now as well. It has lots of focuses where it focuses on communities of concentration of poverty and ways of dealing with that. It deals with the types of education. It expands us to technical education and trade education as well. It also focuses very heavily on providing much more pre-K across the state. And you heard me talk about that earlier. So that's an area of it on which I'm very strongly studied. I will say this, and it's not exactly the question, but it's important to clarify this. When we were considering the blueprint, a lot of mail was sent by the governor and by people who supported him that this was a tax bill. And they clumsily took the amount of money that this would take and divided it by the number of people in Maryland and said, this is how much more tax everyone's going to pay. Well, we're not that clumsy. And we have come up with nice ways of funding this. And the blueprint is currently funded for the next 4 or 5 years in the projected budgets without any sort of tax increase to support that. And so it's well on its way. And I'm real pleased that we have it actually in place. We're investing in our future here. So the big answer is we're investing in our future. We're going to get a world-class education for all students, regardless of where they live in the state.
Thank you, Eric. We have another question, which is on the clean needle exchange. Will there be support for clean needle exchange facilities in Maryland as a public health measure?
I can start that one. Yeah. So syringe exchange programs have been around for a while, and so that's it was originally started, I think, back in the late 90s in Baltimore City, and Baltimore City was one of the first jurisdictions that had syringe services programs. I think a couple of years ago, we actually had legislation in place that expanded it across, allowed other jurisdictions, whether it's health departments or nonprofits, to also start syringe service programs in other areas of the state as well. That actually did pass. So yeah, it is available for any local jurisdiction that wants to start one.
Clarence, how about Dan's old bill about actual facilities for people to safe areas for people to?
Yeah, so there have been bills that have been introduced for safe consumption facilities. These are along similar lines to that follow kind of a public health harm reduction kind of principle, that it's better to be able to have safe locations if people are going to be using substances, that these are locations that can be monitored. They oftentimes have someone who has some basic emergency medical or healthcare training that can refer them to services if they need help. There are also additional provisions in there that allow for these individuals that are going to these locations to also be plugged into other counseling and substance use type programs. And so it's been successful in other locations. It's not available yet here in Maryland. I think some locations out in Seattle, some in the UK, other locations have found this to be a very successful harm reduction type of program to reduce deaths unnecessarily. I think, I don't want to call out one of my colleagues, but I think someone here did, Senator Hedelman did sponsor legislation on this, right?
Yes, I did the past 2 years, and we're actually going to take a year off this year. And but with the hope of educating doing some briefings with other members, and then coming back next year if I'm elected to be able to offer. What the bill did is created 6 pilot programs around the state, 2 urban, 2 suburban, 2 rural, and created an overdose prevention site program. If you have been reading the news lately, you may have seen that New York City just started doing this, and in the first, I think it's been up for less than 2 months, and they've already saved dozens of lives by being able to tend to people who have overdosed and being able to prevent deaths. So that's what this is about. It is exactly as Senator Lamb said, a harm reduction strategy to the very real problem in Baltimore County, as well as statewide. But we are the #2 jurisdiction for overdose of using opioids. So it's definitely a real problem.
Okay, thank you. There's one more redistricting quick question. Do you support moving the western boundary of 42B to 183? Kathy, Kathy Forbes?
Yes, so if you look at the map for 42, so now I'm in 42A, but because of population losses in the city and my district, 42A in Towson, becomes part of a city-county shared district. 42B, so my district becomes 43A or 43B. I'm sorry, I'm making it more confusing. So 42B, it will be Ruxton and like the Loch Raven area, and then up York Road right now. It does not go all the way over to I-83. 42A in the new map is everything from the Pennsylvania line down that doesn't include that area in 42B. 42C, a third member district, is in Carroll County. So District 42 no longer includes the Towson area, but includes 3 single member districts, one in Carroll County that includes the Westminster area in it.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Why all these single member districts?
I don't know. I can't answer that. I know the governor was asking for all single member districts, and in the governor's commission maps, there are many more single member districts. I think that in my case, they defend my single member district as being like Towson is a unique area where we have a downtown business area, state institutions like Towson University, the University of Maryland Medical Center, GBMC, and Goucher College, all of these things living in a small area with communities around it. And that having one point person to state to work on issues is better than having them each having to reach out to 3 people every time. So that's how they've defended my district in the past. I don't know why they chose to draw 3 single member districts in District 42 in this new map. And you can see it, the one that Senator Hedelman has shared in the comments. You can see 42 is 3 single member districts in the new map.
All right. Then we have an education question on Delaney High School, which is, as you know, in Baltimore County is always a question. Why was the proposal for building a new Delaney High School canceled when there was still a roof leakage?
Macaroni and cheese, collard greens, and a piece of cornbread.
Does anybody want to answer?
Macaroni.
Can I just jump in and ask that everyone mute themselves if they're not already muted? We're hearing somebody.
Senator Campbell.
Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'll offer this, and my colleagues will correct me. I think the issue had to do with the study that had been done that showed that the rebuild at Delaney and Towson would take too much money out of the necessary work that was needed elsewhere in the county, which is why Delegate Forbes is speaking to how we need more money than the Build Back Better. And the roof itself has to be addressed, but can be addressed without a new school build. So it's not that there's not a need, but there are needs around the county, and that two-school project would take money away from other necessary projects.
Yes, I mean, I from long experience doing sports physicals at Lansdowne, that school is in desperate need. So
I'll jump in and share with you that Lansdowne is being rebuilt. It is funded. It is the design of it is all funded, and half of the construction is funding, and it's going forward. And Lansdowne is getting a new high school.
yeah.
The study Delegate Hill referred to as the multi-year improvement plan for all schools, my IPASS, which was funded through the county executive's office. That was a series. It started the contract was awarded during March of 2020 during the pandemic, and they spent 6 months looking at high schools. And then they spent another period of time looking at the rest of the schools. And one of the things that my IPASS tried to do was take the amount of money we have to spend on school construction, both the known state and county contribution, and the schools that we have, and how can we touch them all in 15 years. So in my mind, a few of the flaws of that were that we were touching all schools in 15 years. So we have some schools that were built last year that their needs 15 years from now were going ahead of schools that are literally falling apart now. Towson High is the oldest high school in Baltimore County and the most overcrowded. Another problem with my IPASS, it assumed that all funding was static. So this is the only amount of money we would have to do all this work that we need to do. And it wasn't really meeting the needs of a number of schools. There were a number of schools that are in the 70-year to 85-year-old age group that had outlived their usefulness as buildings that were getting partial renovations in my IPASS, and that's just not acceptable. So I'm a longtime advocate on school construction, and it's just not about the schools in my district. Towson High happens to be in my district, but it's about making sure we're moving forward. In the last 10 years in Baltimore County, we've been doing something called Schools for Our Future, where we've been rebuilding schools, and those schools have been rebuilt all around Baltimore County. Colgate Elementary, Berkshire Elementary, Dundalk Elementary in the southeast, Lansdowne Elementary School, Relay Elementary School in the southwest, Chadwick Elementary School in the northwest, like Mays Chapel in the north. Like, instead of patching together old buildings that were built and have outlived their usefulness, we're rebuilding. And so we really, in my heart, we need to figure out a way to continue that project and to keep our kids in 21st century buildings. And we all know that good schools, strong schools make strong communities. And if you're looking for a place to raise your family and you walk down and see the school that your kids are going to have to go to, and it's falling apart, like, there are many other places you can move in Howard County, Carroll County, north of the Pennsylvania line, Harford County, that are younger jurisdictions who have their schools, that they have smaller school systems and newer school systems. And so their buildings are not in the condition that we are in Baltimore County. So to keep and attract our tax base, we need to address our school construction. Thanks.
All right, and then we have one last question. Well, before we go there, in the chat, Laurie Taylor Mitchell has put some numbers about the pandemic and the increase in poverty in the school system due to the pandemic. And those are interesting statistics. And if you have a chance, please look at them, and we'll try and get them up onto our website. And one last question is, how will you support our immigrant neighbors in Baltimore County during the 2022 session? That is not a very specific question, but if anybody wants to tackle it, I'd be appreciative.
You know, it's important to note that in the last session, we increased the earned income tax credit and extended it to people who are holders of tax numbers rather than Social Security numbers, which was controversial, but absolutely good policy. These are people who are taxpayers and they deserve that tax credit as much as anyone else who is a taxpayer. Not only does it help them, but it helps us to have them have money that allows them to actually be productive and participating members of our economy. So we have made significant moves, and it is unprecedented that we did that. We also raised the level of the earned income, of the percentage where people qualify for the earned income tax credit across the board. We feel like it's the right move. And so that's what we've begun with. I don't know what else I can anticipate, but that was a bold move by us, and I think a really valuable one.
Yeah.
I just want to add two things. One is I know that in this area, a number of people in the county have reached out to me about how I could be helpful with the settlement of Afghan refugees. And I know some churches and synagogues have been really involved in trying to help families who are brand new to this area settle in. So that is something, I don't know if others have heard the same on a very granular level. But with regard to policy, I'm introducing a bill again this year to provide legal assistance to people who are going through deportation proceedings. So it's called universal representation. It's actually I introduced it early, so it's up on the website. But there are a number of people who have been in Maryland for many, many years, and if they are picked up and imprisoned and might have to go through deportation proceedings, they are not right now afforded legal counsel, which they are losing their liberty. And many of them, English is not their first language, and they are behind bars and face being separated from their families and everything they know here. And my bill would help to get them the professional assistance that they need to be able to understand those very complicated proceedings.
Yeah, let me add as well. We passed two pieces of legislation this past session, which were designed to help immigrants. The governor vetoed both, but we overrode both vetoes. One of them was a bill that I had that prevents ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, from getting access to the state's databases, particularly driver's license databases, for the purpose of getting the address of someone who they suspect is undocumented, strictly for the purpose of deporting them. We know that this has happened in Maryland, in particular in Baltimore, so we thought this was extremely unfair, especially since we encourage immigrants who are undocumented to get Maryland driver's licenses to improve safety on the roads. So that's one bill. The other one, sponsored by Delegate Von Stewart, was to prohibit the use of private detention facilities in which undocumented immigrants who had been picked up or arrested for, say, a traffic violation, was held so that ICE then could then come and pick them up. So both cases, we passed those bills, large majorities, and overrode the governor's veto.
And it'd be interesting to just note, by the way, particularly on Delegate Stein's bill, but also on Delegate Stewart's bill, that the Department of Transportation and the Department of Corrections were in favor of the bill, even though the governor vetoed it, because we worked so closely with them to make sure that this was policy that they actually liked. So it shows you how you can actually work with the bureaucracy and across party lines, even though you might get some political backlash from it.
I'd just like to say that we're glad that during the special session, we were able to override the governor's veto of the bill that I had, which took governors out of parole considerations. The commissioners are using social science data, and they're looking at the facts in the case and at what the person has done to improve their lives and their readiness to be paroled. Governors were doing what both Glendon and Ehrlich post their governorships admitted, was looking at their political trajectory and what would make them look good. And so we got that done as an override.
Well, thank you all. We had one more question about how to be more informed about legislation and other information on Baltimore County. And for everybody attending, I would suggest that you watch the League of Women Voters Maryland, their advocacy link for information on what's going on in the legislature. And in Baltimore County, watch our own Baltimore County League's website for information on the many things that we're following.
And Nielsen, we do have quite a few questions from the chat too. So when you're ready for those, I will let,
Okay, go ahead.
They've been sent, they didn't go to everybody, so they've come to me. So are you ready or?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, so the first one is for Senator Sidner. I can't see if he's still on. If we could also add a section to the new police body worn camera legislation to ensure that officers don't have the ability to turn their cameras off. And maybe you could speak to that.
Thank you. And with regards to that, we've never gotten into that in terms of state law. That's generally been driven by the policy of the particular police department in terms of how and when it's activated and when that activation is terminated. So when I served on the initial committee when we passed this legislation back in 2015, I believe at that time the consensus from most of these police departments were, look, all right, if this is how we're moving forward, there's some things that the law should dictate, and there's other things that they felt that their departments should have some control over. And I don't necessarily disagree with that.
Thank you. Danielle Smith, who is the person who asked that question, I see your hand is up. Did you want to follow up on that?
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much, Senator Sidner, for answering that question. One of the reasons why I was stating that, because we find that a lot of these cases, the officers don't come to the trials, and they don't have to because there's quote unquote no evidence. They turn their cameras off when it's convenient. And then also if something can be put in that legislation regarding, we have to hit people in their pockets. So when you're on suspension, maybe trying to suspend them without pay and not let them be on a vacation on a taxpayer dollar. That's just another suggestion. Thank you.
Given what you were just saying, I will say last year within the policing bills that we passed, we had language in those bills to address situations where law enforcement officers were purposely trying to not record something, say for whatever nefarious reasons. So if I don't know if that gets to what you're talking about, but that is certainly something that's controlled by legislation. We don't want law enforcement officers doing what we saw happened in Baltimore, where you had someone turning on cameras, creating fake evidence, and then attempting to act as if that's what truly happened. So there are some parameters there that may address what you're talking about.
Thank you. Another question that is in the chat was for Delegate Belcastro about including school staff and social workers in legislation regarding suicides. I'm not sure if she's still, I know some people have had to leave. Let's see. It looks like she may not be with us. So let's go on to another question. Question for Delegates Hill and Senator Lamb. Thank you for expanding postpartum dental benefits, Medicaid recipients, and former foster care individuals. What is the likelihood of consideration being given to extending comprehensive adult dental benefits to all Maryland Medicaid recipients?
I think it's actually pretty good. The study that was done, I think we're getting a report. I think we're getting reports out on how that can be done. I think it would be better if the Build Back Better federal law passed, which I believe covers adult benefits as well and Medicare. But I think that we have some surplus money, right, coming as you've heard about, and that is one of the areas that I think will get some priority. But that's just my sense. Senator Lamb may have a different feeling. Different.
No, I think Delegate Hill covered pretty well, so I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see here. Sorry, just scrolling through here. We addressed that. A question about foster care. Those in our legal custody, the health officer has done incredibly good work in Baltimore County, but he's also the director of DSS. Placements and workforce continue to be a serious problem, and rumor has it that the agency is forced to place youth in hotels. Are there any legislative initiatives any of you are aware of to address the needs of this vulnerable population and the workforce responsible for their care?
That might be a new one, Eric.
Yeah.
Why don't we take that question and maybe one of us can investigate.
Right. We'll follow up afterwards. Let's see here. Is Delegate Feldmark still on? Let's see.
I am.
Okay, good. This one is, thank you, addressed to you. Can you comment on the extent, impact, and amelioration efforts related to the Department of Health security incident?
So we actually, on the second day of session, have a joint briefing with the Health and Government Operations Committee to hear about that. I think it has been really, obviously, very concerning. Not only to see the breach that occurred, but also the sort of the lack of information that followed, and even as legislators still sort of struggling to get meaningful information about what exactly happened and what's being done. So I don't have a very detailed or substantive answer to that. I am hoping that we'll get some more information at this upcoming briefing, and happy to follow up if you want to reach out to me directly by email.
And will that be on the web?
Yes. If you go to, I believe probably the best way to find it is through the HGO committee hearings, right. And that will be, just as all of our committee hearings or briefings will be streaming online.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions from Dr. Crystal Francis from the Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform Questions. Would Delegate Brooks or someone on economic matters consider introducing a bill to provide or expand tax incentives for employers at all levels that hire people returning to the community after a period of incarceration? That's the first question.
Hi, this is Kim. Obviously, Delegate Brooks isn't on the call, but as background, Delegate Brooks is an accountant by trade. He oftentimes does look for initiatives that he can offer for tax credits for various businesses, and he is, obviously a proponent as a small business owner himself of incentives for small businesses. I know that he has been a proponent of working with and making sure that folks who were incarcerated are giving an opportunity to enter back into society, and giving them initiatives to make that transition a little bit smoother. So while I can't speak on his behalf, I'm certain that that's something that he may consider, and you can always reach out to our office if you'd like to further discuss that with him. I can provide his email address in the chat if that's helpful. And, obviously I'm willing to set up a virtual call or a meeting to further elaborate.
Let me just chime in real quick and say that one of the bigger issues we have, which we have been working on, and I think JPR has been working on as well, is making sure that when people are ready, who have been formerly incarcerated, are ready to go back to work, that their records don't interfere with their ability if it's an appropriate place for them to be. So we've dealt with expungement legislation over the last 6 or 7 years. We've really expanded the ability to have records expunged, which is a much bigger incentive to get people back to work, because they don't have to necessarily inform about an expunged record to their possible employer. But we actually have a problem now, because we passed legislation last year that Delegate Barron put in. He's no longer with us, but which automatically takes people's records off of case search if it's been dismissed or null prossed. And that seems like a great idea. It's sort of like an automatic expungement of a record, as long as the charges are no longer are there. But it hurts particularly, among others, our immigrant community, but it hurts others too, because they need to show, oftentimes immigration courts are aware of charges that were levied, and they need to see that those charges were in fact dismissed. And the only way to do that is to be able to pull up, and if it's automatically expunged and they can't pull it up, then they can't get it, and then they have a problem with their immigration status. So we sort of we have to figure out a way to convince the courts to allow people to have them automatically expunged and not just removed from the case search. So this is just some of the things we're grappling with. But yes, we need more incentives to get people who are formerly incarcerated employed, which is what we're trying to do from all different perspectives.
And if I might add, going to Dr. Francis's question, that type of legislation has been introduced in the past. However, the caveat or the issue with the legislation that had been introduced in the past is you had it was connected with if you want employers to hire people who have been incarcerated and are out, the employers, what they were seeking was essentially a nullification of a negligent hiring rights, so or the ability to sue for negligent hiring. So you would have taken away people's remedies if, let's say, an employer hired someone who happened to hurt a customer or something, and later on, and I know, at least for me, that I wasn't about to take away someone's right to sue an employer for negligent hiring in order to obtain that particular benefit.
Thank you. And there are a few more questions, but just as a follow-up to that discussion, she had asked if we have any recommendations on delegates or senators that could be approached to encourage to develop or sponsor initiatives related to improving employment outcomes for people with records.
I've been, I had a couple of correction bills in the past couple of years that's led me to be looking, hopefully in this legislative session, but probably it requires a little bit more development and may take additional time if I'm reelected, to create a fund that would help people upon reentry to support their other basic needs and things like transportation, job training, and other kinds of things during the process of reentry. Some of that money could potentially be used to support apprenticeship programs as well. And we're looking at some of the funds that MCE has in its profit side off on times which those monies have been sent back to the general fund. And so we're trying to look at whether there are funds available without having to do major new appropriations to help with reentry. Also, part of the legislation I introduced to raise the wage for incarcerated people who currently are making between 17 and 30 cents an hour was to require that some of that money be set aside into savings so that upon release, they actually have some funds to build off. And it's also about having them use some of the money that they're making to pay child support and restitution to victims and other things so that their reentry into the community is a little bit easier. You can imagine that that's been, there's been a fair amount of pushback on that legislation. So I'm trying to work with advocates and corrections to see if we can come up with ways to do better to serve the overall goal of, since 85% of folks are coming back to the community, we want it to be successful. And if we do better on the inside and we're more about rehabilitation and strengthening, and then we support them on the outside through that transition, we ought to do better overall. And I think Delegate Feldmark has some reentry.
I was just going to say,
yeah. So I have in the past and plan to try again this coming session with a Reentry Success Act, which looks at a number of things to happen before someone is released from incarceration, including reentry mediation and making sure that they're connected with and already enrolled in entitlements that they would be eligible for upon release. So some things to help smooth that transition. The bill I have does not deal specifically with employment after reentry, but certainly those are some fundamentals to help make that a better transition and have a strong foundation for success. It's certainly an issue I care about, and I'm happy to continue the conversation with anyone. And is it okay if I jump back for just a minute to the earlier question about the briefing I mentioned? It is scheduled to be streamed, as all committee briefings are. I did just want to, if someone's planning to join, I don't want you to be surprised. It is likely that we will vote to go into closed session if public discussion is considered a risk to security. So I just wanted to give that caveat so no one's tuning in and then surprised. But again, I know it's an issue of concern, and happy to follow up offline with anyone who wants to reach out.
Erica, can I add one more thing to the reentry discussion? So we know that we've had success when we take adults with developmental disabilities and we look for employment by using, frankly, caseworkers who advocate for them, who work with the employers to communicate with them so that if someone is not working up to task or they need additional training, it's less of the supervisor saying you need to do this. They go to the advocate, who then works with the person to make sure that they can get them up to speed. And it may be that some kind of model where there's an intermediary may end up in some cases being more effective than tax breaks, because I think Delegate Cardin has spoken to. I mean, you were doing things to address the people are concerned about safety and that kind of thing. We've done some legislative things to make sure that if folks have certifications and things like barbary or other things, that they're allowed to do those jobs, because we used to restrict folks upon reentry and say you can't do that job even if you've got a certification for it. And so we've opened those things out to make sure there's appropriate matching that the crime, you know, if it was a crime of theft, then no, you're not going to work for the bank, right? But it may be appropriate for you to work in some other job, in some other what have you, until you're able to build your reputation back. So the training piece and having employers, you know, feel comfortable with the fact that they're going to be not only appropriately changed, because these folks are coming out and really have some really strong skills, but that's those soft skills are also being emphasized. And I know that under the current secretary, there is a real emphasis across corrections to make sure that the soft skills are being trained, but the employers don't necessarily know that. So just another thought.
Thank you. We have so many questions and we are at the end of our time. So I don't want to, I know it's hard to carve out time from your busy schedules, and we don't want to run over. I would encourage all of our participants who put very good questions into the chat, and we're not able to have them voiced, to follow up with your representatives or with us at the League. And I will make sure to put my email address in the chat before we conclude. And Nielsen, I believe that you might have had some concluding statements. Or...
I just wanted to say thank you, particularly to the legislators who attended, and we were pleased to hear from you, and we look forward to doing it again next year, maybe, and to seeing you during this session.
It would be lovely if we could be in person again, but we will
Thank you very much.
To be adaptable. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great day and have a wonderful session.
Yes.
Great session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for your dedication to Baltimore.
Yes.